If you clicked on this video, I think that perfume or fragrance is something that you might be interested in, and you've probably had issues with it, whether your fragrance doesn't last long enough, your fragrance doesn't project far enough, maybe you're someone who likes to buy the extraits over the original fragrances. Today, I wanted to deep dive into what I personally consider to be the evil myth of longevity and projection. This video will be quite science heavy, but there is so much nuance to the conversation of fragrance oil, projection, longevity, because we are talking about science when we're talking about fragrance. For the average consumer, they kind of learn just a little bit of the picture and run with that, and that has caused a lot of misconceptions about the industry, and therefore brands need to use this really deceptive marketing tactic in order to get people to buy. This is where the myth comes in, and this is where the dark marketing comes in my opinion. I don't think that, brands are evil or marketing is necessarily inherently dark or trying to be deceptive, but genuinely it is because the understanding of the fragrance market is so slight, and therefore it is very easy to take advantage of people not knowing better. And I think that if we were more informed consumers, which hopefully you will be by the end of this video, brands would not have to do these trends and we would not have to see the fragrance industry turn the way it is turning right now. I hope. I personally cannot make this change happen, but I really wish I could. So I hope that a lot of people watch this video. If you want to share it, please like, subscribe. It boosts the algorithm, and I really do want to see artistry and creation come back to fragrance rather than some of the change we've been seeing lately. So I hope this video will impact a little bit. My name is Emma. I am currently a master's level perfumery student studying set design and creation. I finished my Bachelor of Science last year, so I have a background in fragrance. In this video, we are going to talk about fragrance concentration, fragrance oil, as well as why higher fragrance oil does not cause your fragrance to last longer. That is essentially the synopsis of this video, so let's get into it. Now, my first point that we have to talk on as a bit of a background is the fragrance pyramid, as well as volatility of fragrances. So the perfume pyramid is essentially a schema to represent the way that your fragrance changes over time. Because when you put on perfume and you smell it immediately versus 5 hours later on your skin, it will smell different. And the fragrance pyramid is what represents that. We have the top, middle, and base, and it is shaped like a pyramid because the top is shorter lived than the bottom. So essentially you have less time with the top notes than you do with the bottom notes, hence that is why it is a bigger portion. It's an imperfect scheme, but say the top notes last 15 minutes, and then after 15 minutes you start to smell your heart notes, and those last about 2 hours, and then after 2 hours you start to smell your base notes. And that is the perfume pyramid represented like this. Now, people have asked me, why would you use top notes if they only last 15 minutes? What's the point of top notes? The fragrance pyramid represents a chemical characteristic of these molecules known as volatility. There's a fragrance note known as linalool, and it is shaped like this. Linalool is a note that is in a lot of citruses, it's in a lot of green notes, a lot of fresh notes, a classic top note. It is not a long-lasting note. You put it on your dabber and it's gone in 30 seconds. And that is because there is a chemical nature to the structure of this molecule. Generally, in an oversimplification, molecules that are longer and have less branches and less going on don't last as long, and it's easier for them to evaporate into the air. Notes like lemon, citrus, fresh notes generally are made of molecules that look sort of like this in some way, shape, or form, and that causes them to evaporate very quickly. So this is the chemical nature of those notes. An example of a base note or a longer lasting note would be Bactinol. This is a sandalwood-esque note, and as you can see, we have some different rings in here. It's very branched, it has a higher molecular weight, and therefore it has more capability to be sticky. To really oversimplify, volatility and the way that your fragrance lasts is essentially due to the intermolecular forces, so the way that the molecules interact with one another. So essentially think of every molecule as a basketball covered in maple syrup. Top notes are really small basketballs. They don't have a lot of surface area, and so they don't have a lot of area to stick to other molecules. This isn't the best analogy, but essentially they don't have a lot of stick. Versus vanilla, musk, sandalwood, oud. These are big molecules that have a lot of surface area and a lot of place to stick. And so they last longer because they're stickier, essentially. This is due to the intermolecular forces that they're able to attract. When you look at the perfume pyramid, there are different families that you always see in the top versus the middle versus the base. And that is because of the chemical nature of these molecules. Citrus notes are always in the top, rose notes essentially always in the middle, base notes are always the same type of family. And that is why a fragrance that is a woody fragrance will always last longer than a fragrance that is a citrus fragrance. Because when you have a citrus scented fragrance, unless you add base notes, because the base notes will stick to the top notes and try to hold them down, but that changes the actual scent of the fragrance because you're adding in woods or you're adding in musk. If you were to have a lemon fragrance and you want it to last longer, so you add oud, sure, the oud will make the lemon note lasts longer, but then it smells like oud. So to answer the question of why do we use top notes, it's because we like the smell of citrus, we like the smell of basil, we like the smell of mint. And if we could only formulate with fragrance notes that lasted a certain amount of time, we would only ever smell like wood or incense or labdanum or ambergris or musk. And that's boring. So this was a grave oversimplification, but understanding that there is a chemical nature to the fragrances that we smell gives essential background and essential context to how perfume works. Number two, let's talk about projection and smelling fragrance. When you smell the fragrance, that is because the fragrance has bloomed into the air. In a fragrance, you have oil concentrate and you have alcohol. Now, more alcohol does not always allow for this blooming effect, where your fragrance projects, your fragrance fills the air. That is the bloom of the fragrance. And sometimes when you have a lot of oil, the oil is sticking rather than blooming. I found this with the fragrance Milk by Dead Cool. They have milk and they have extra milk. Same perfume, higher concentration, lower concentration. The higher concentration, I can't smell as much. And it also, in my opinion, doesn't smell as good. I personally like Dead Cool Milk better because it has better blooming. I smell it in the air more. And having a lower concentration helps your fragrance project into the air, and sometimes you can actually smell better. Some raw materials you cannot smell when they're at too high of a concentration. Some raw materials you can smell better at 1% or 0.1% than you can smell at 5%. So also thinking back to my first point when it comes to concentration, more oil generally causes more stick, and more stick doesn't necessarily cause the bloom. So when you have a lot more oil, sometimes it'll stay closer to your skin rather than projecting into the air. So we can see things like this where you have a really high concentrated formula that is not blooming the way that you would expect it to. It might last longer, but it won't project as much, and sometimes you'll have to get really close to smell it. Terms that we have to denote the concentration of the alcohol in the perfume, but there's not actually any firm regulations for it. Eau de toilette, eau de parfum, and parfum don't really have meanings, and they have huge variations. So if you're going for an eau de toilette versus an eau de parfum, they might even have the same amount of perfume oil because they don't actually have firm meanings. Going back to what I said in the point before, where chemical families have chemical identities and chemical properties that make them behave the same way. You have a 33% fragrance that is a citrus fragrance versus a 5% woody oud fragrance. The woody oud fragrance will be longer lasting and stronger than the citrus fragrance. So a fragrance that is an eau de toilette isn't necessarily weak because there are so many more things at play than concentration. Concentration is such a small piece of the puzzle. Furthermore, the concentration refers to the oil concentrate, not just the perfume oil. As a perfumer, when you are making the fragrance, you are first making the concentrate without the alcohol, and it is out of 1,000 kilograms or whatever. So you put in, however many grams of bergamot and however many grams of lemon and however many grams of this and that and this. And then to get to the solid number, you add in a solvent, so DPG or something like that. And that counts toward your 100%. So the concentrate itself is a mixture of oil and solvent. So some brands can just add a ton of solvent because it's super cheap, and then they can sell a bottle of perfume with 40% perfume concentrate. But it's actually pretty much all solvent, and you would have more perfume oil in a fragrance that is 11% concentrate as opposed to the 40%. Furthermore, one thing that I've heard rumors is that there's a note called hedione, and hedione is something that it's actually a little bit hard to smell. It's kind of like a watery, airy, transparent jasmine scent that apparently activates the brain's pleasure centers. And one thing that people say about jasmine is it's basically used like a solvent these days. And that is because brands, if they're marketing the fact that they have a really, really high concentration of perfume oil, they can add their regular, fragrance and then add a crap ton of hedione, and then they have a 45% concentration, but it's all hedione. It's just a regular fragrance with a bunch more hedione, which doesn't really have a really strong smell. And you might be thinking, oh my gosh, that's crazy, like what the heck? But I urge you to take a step back, because how many brands are marketing the amount of perfume oil that they have? I really don't see it quite frequently. 20% perfume oil is very high. It's a high perfume oil concentration. So 33%, 40% are very, very high. And if brands are doing the tactic of marketing that they have such a high concentration of perfume oil, they might be pulling one of these on you. And that is what upsets me. And that's what makes me wish that people knew better, so that these brands didn't have to do these weird, shady things for you to think their fragrance lasts longer. Because at the end of the day, it's the same perfume, but with more solvent, or with more hedione. And if it lasts longer than another fragrance on the market, that's probably just because it's an oud fragrance rather than a citrus fragrance, not because it actually has more perfume oil. And this is why I don't think we should start buying because of fragrance oil concentration, because that causes these brands to keep doing this weird, shady stuff. So also thinking back to my first point when it comes to concentration, more oil generally causes more stick, and more stick doesn't necessarily cause the bloom. So when you have a lot more oil, sometimes it'll stay closer to your skin rather than projecting into the air. So we can see things like this where you have a really high concentrated formula that is not blooming the way that you would expect it to. It might last longer, but it won't project as much, and sometimes you'll have to get really close to smell it. Show you some DMs that I had with a follower recently that kind of caused me to want to make this video. This lovely gentleman reached out to me recently about buying a fragrance from a brand called God of Essence, and I'm not going to make any claims about this brand because I don't know anything about them. I have no relationship with them. I've literally never heard of them until before this, and I don't work in the industry, so everything I'm saying, I do work in the industry, but I'm an influencer, so everything I'm saying is speculation. He emailed me and he said, "Hey Emma, I bought this fragrance for my mom. It says it has 45% fragrance oil, but I can't smell it." He says, "It feels very weak. I thought it might be nose fatigue, but then I asked my mom if she could smell it on me, and she said no. She could only smell it when she got too close." Now, this fragrance is a 50 ml fragrance that is 45% extrait de parfum, and he said it's sourced from Italy. Is that a marketing gimmick? If a fragrance is manufactured in Italy, or that's because the final product is assembled in Italy, not necessarily that all of the ingredients are sourced from Italy. There's only a few raw materials that actually come from Italy. If you want to work with a diverse realm of raw materials, you kind of need to source globally. Italy has bergamot, Italy has, lemon and orange and fun citruses, but Italy isn't necessarily the hub for vetiver or oud. So if it's an oud fragrance, it's not 100% sourced from Italy because there's no oud there. But the product can be from Italy because made in Italy is for when your final product is bottled and put in the bottle and manufactured, that is where it is made. So wherever the final assembly happens, that's where your fragrance is made. So also thinking back to my first point when it comes to concentration, more oil generally causes more stick, and more stick doesn't necessarily cause the bloom. So when you have a lot more oil, sometimes it'll stay closer to your skin rather than projecting into the air. So we can see things like this where you have a really high concentrated formula that is not blooming the way that you would expect it to. It might last longer, but it won't project as much, and sometimes you'll have to get really close to smell it. Now, number 5 5, we have to talk about the threshold of detection. I mentioned earlier that there's a point in which a fragrance is so concentrated that you can't smell it. So I'm going to show you specifically why that is and why a fragrance with more fragrance oil concentration might not necessarily smell stronger. So this kind of has to do with nose blindness, but also just has to do with our biological ability to smell things. So I'm going to talk about gas chromatography here. I don't expect everyone to know what it is, and the point of this video is not to explain gas chromatography, so just bear with me here. There is a process called GCMS, and essentially what it is hook a machine up to perfume. You inject a bit of solvent, so you can inject some perfume, and the machine will read out every molecule that is in the solvent. So essentially that is a way to analyze perfume from a chemical level. So if someone wants to make a dupe, but of course, because perfume formulas are completely secret and proprietary, you can use a GCMS machine to read out the molecules. So what GCMS does is you inject the solvent into a machine, the machine slowly heats up, and one by one the fragrances evaporate. And as they evaporate, they show up on something like this. This is like a very vague thing of what you would see on a GCMS machine. The first peak would happen here, and based on the temperature it would happen at, say this is like, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. That's kind of how you would extrapolate what is in the perfume. So something obviously would have boiled off here, and based on the time, the temperature, you would know, okay, that's the bergamot. Say that this is the lemon, this is the lavender, this is the rose, and this here at the end is the oud. So say that this is a eau de parfum 15% concentrated perfume, and you wanted to make a version of this, and you wanted to increase the concentration. Say that this down here is the 15% perfume oil, and the red is the 20% perfume oil. So the first would be lemon, this would be the lavender, this would be the rose, and the oud. So the first fragrance is all under the pink, which is your nose's, essentially your nose's max, where your nose taps out and it can't smell anymore. So the first fragrance is under this, so you can smell all the notes. But then when you increase the concentration, you can see these two notes here are well above your nose's threshold of detection. And so in this instance, this is a fragrance where people would smell it, and all they would smell would be the final notes, the rose and the oud. And that is because even though there is so much more of these notes, you can't smell it because it is overdosed. So if you were to have this 15% and 20% perfume oil of the same fragrance and give them to people, they would say that one of them smells a lot more like lemon and lavender and one of them doesn't. And you would probably smell the one that doesn't have the lemon and lavender and say, well, just boost the amount. But it actually has more. It's just that it is more complex than more equals more smell. So in this case, the more balanced fragrance where you can smell all the notes that really shine through would be the one with a lower concentration. Sometimes making the strongest fragrance isn't adding the highest amount of oil, but this is the issue, is that the general population looks for high oil concentrations, they look for extrait de parfum, and they think that that means that something is going to be very long lasting. And so even though these master perfumers know what they're doing when they're formulating fragrances, there's a conflict between what they're doing and what the market understands to be a long-lasting fragrance. And so even if the fragrance would be super strong and long-lasting at 8%, they have to add however many grams of hedione, so then it's suddenly a 40% perfume oil, even though it's the same. Or boost up the solvent in the concentrate, so then it's a 40% perfume oil, even though these things are not doing anything to the perfume, and the perfume oil itself is what is shining. People don't necessarily understand the behind the scenes, they just understand perfume oil, extrait de parfum, highly concentrated. So point number 6 is that perfumers don't formulate for projection. This is false. There is a job that is the right hand of the perfumer called the evaluator, and you always have a team of evaluators working on a project whose pure job is to evaluate the mods of the fragrances, so the iterations of a fragrance. You make several drafts before the final draft, and there is a whole team of people wear testing the perfume, testing it on different skin, testing it on cards, which one is the longest lasting, which one is the best performing. And sure, the one that they might choose as the final pick might not be as long lasting as your oud for greatness, but it was the longest lasting of the bunch. It was the best of the bunch. They formulate, and perfumers, even when the client is happy with a formula, they will then go on to make the fragrance stable over time and fix it and tweak it so it is longer lasting. So that is just completely false. They do formulate for projection and longevity. Is this always the first goal in mind? No. The first goal in mind is to formulate a fragrance that smells adjacent or close to the brief, and the brief might say it has to be super, super long lasting, which might cause them to make something super, super long lasting, but they do carefully select and curate based on longevity and performance as well as scent. Number 7, let's talk about nose blindness and why you don't smell a fragrance over a period of time. If there is a fragrance that you don't find to be long lasting, there is a good chance that you can go nose blind. Your sense of smell, or your ability to experience olfaction, is something that keeps us alive as animals. Your sense of sight helps you see dangers, so you don't accidentally walk off a cliff, so you don't accidentally walk into a wall. So if there's a bear coming, you might go the other way. The purpose of your ability to smell is so you can detect chemical dangers. For example, if you have 2 apples that look the same, but one of them smells rotten, you will not eat the rotten one, you will eat the fresh one. It can also help you decipher what is food versus what is not food, so it can help you locate food for a meal. So if your fragrance that you're wearing all day long, you can't smell after 5 hours, and you think it's gone, it might not be gone, you might just be nose blind. And that is because every time you are smelling something, your brain is registering it and flagging it actively to you. You are consciously processing it. And so if all day long you are subject to this ambient smell that is not going away, and it has not located you any food, and it has not harmed you in any way, then your brain will say, okay, this is not a threat. I don't need to process this anymore, and can keep flagging it. I can use my energy doing something else. And so you can become nose blind to something because it just doesn't serve a purpose for your brain, because your brain is trying to keep you alive. Registering the smell is essentially wasted time for your brain. And so that is why you can become nose blind to things.
There are so many fragrances that I'll hear people say that these fragrances don't last, like Baccarat Rouge. Baccarat Rouge lasts so long. It's gonna stick to everything you've ever touched, everything you've even looked at that day. But if it's disappeared in terms of your own sensory perception and you can't pick up on it, I am so sure that everyone else is able to smell you. I even rewatched one of my old reviews here for the fragrance called Valaya, and I think I had this fragrance for about 5 days before I reviewed it, 5 or 6 days. And when I first reviewed it, I said that it lasted only about 4 hours on me. And watching that back, I thought, oh my god, I was so nose blind, because Valaya is so long lasting, so beast projecting. It fills a room, it lasts 12 hours plus on me, and every time I've worn it, I've gotten compliments because it projects, and it is a fragrance that is a beast performer. But when I first got it, the first few days that I wore it, I was completely nose blind, and I just was not perceiving my fragrance, even though it was lasting a long time. The reason I bring this up is not to, disregard anyone's experience with fragrances, because our experiences are our experiences, but I think that it's hard to knock fragrances or say this fragrance is not long lasting when it is long lasting and you are just going nose blind, because it's a real phenomenon and it happens all the time. If you are going nose blind, one thing that you can do is reapply your fragrance throughout the day. Topping up the fragrance provides a new concentration of the stimulus, so it will alert your brain back to cue into smelling the fragrance. So that is a way to prevent nose blindness.
Now, a final point that I wanted to touch on here is the IFRA regulations. And so remember the point where I said that in order to meet certain concentration criterias, like if the brand is saying we need a 40% perfume oil, the perfumer will have to put in a ton of hedione or put in a ton of solvent so it meets that 40%, even though it's not actually like 100% perfume oil. And that sounds crazy, but it's really the demand that is the issue. It's the brands asking for the percentages that is the issue, in my opinion, not necessarily the perfumers. And the reason that I just wish that they wouldn't make these demands is because it's not even safe to have a lot of fragrance ingredients above a certain percentage. And if you have a fragrance at 15%, you can't necessarily just increase it to a 20% percentage and be safe. There's a governing body that regulates the amount of concentration of fragrance ingredients that you can put in, and it is called IFRA. It is an international company that regulates all fragrances, and there are chemical data sheets for all of the ingredients that could go into a fragrance, and it tells you the maximum threshold that you can put in that is safe for the categories of fragrance. Now, fragrance is category 4, and you can look up any fragrance ingredient and it'll tell you the percentage that you can have in something for that category. So, for example, I'm going to give you, for example, benzaldehyde. Benzaldehyde is a cherry scent that smells like cherry and bitter almond. You can only have benzaldehyde at 0.27% of a fragrance. So, if you have a fragrance that is a cherry benzaldehyde scent, and the brand says, I need to increase the concentration, you can't put more benzaldehyde in it. You can't just increase benzaldehyde because you can't. You can't put in more benzaldehyde. So if you have a fragrance that smells good at 15%, and you have to make it a 20%, but you can't change the scent itself, you can put in something that doesn't have much of a smell, or you can put in solvent. You can also increase the scent itself by adding other notes like aubépine. I've only heard French people say that word, but aubépine, or like other kind of cherry-like notes that you can put in as well, but you have to maintain the integrity of the formula. So it does pose a challenge, and all fragrance notes have a maximum concentration. So if you need to make a fragrance that's 40% perfume oil, it's not necessarily safe, and we shouldn't want that, because there is a maximum amount of the items that we can put on our skin, and we need to abide these rules. And so if it's not just for the sake of we can't necessarily smell ingredients over a certain percentage, or really high perfume oil doesn't cause more projection, it's also the sake of it's not necessarily safer to have more perfume oil. And due to IFRA, you can't just increase them all by an equal amount because they all have different caps, and you need to be abiding this. So this will change the ingredients. And one thing I've heard someone talk about lately is, this push for longevity and performance and high perfume oil concentrations has caused a lot of fragrances to smell the same. And I'd have to agree here. One perfumer that I really, really like, his name is Quentin Bish, and he is known for making these amazing beast mode fragrances like Amouage Guidance, Amouage Purpose. In the past 2 months, I have gotten a few brands send me their new launches, and I have about 4 perfumes from different brands, all different brands. I have a Lattafa fragrance, I have 2 Amouage fragrances, there's a Fendi fragrance that I smelled yesterday, and they all smell the same. They all smell like the same fragrance. They all last forever, but because they last forever and they're formulated to last forever, they all have the same notes in them. And so if the fragrance industry is really, really prioritizing longevity and performance, you need notes that can exist at these high concentrations. All fragrances have a price cap, so that really shortens your list of what you can play with. And if you want something that lasts a really, really long time, again, going back to what I talked about for volatility, then we can only play in the realm of woods and balsamics. And so I have like 5 fragrances in my collection that this man has made in the past while that smell like the same fragrance over and over and over, because that is a way that the industry is pushing, and I don't like it. I don't like it, and maybe it's just me. Again, love Quentin Bish, love his work. It's just a shame to see. It's just a shame to see, and again, there's so many fragrances from all the other brands that are, still releasing beautiful artisanal fragrances, and these fragrances are art too, but I do think that they represent this push for constantly more oil, constantly stronger, constantly longer lasting, when the markers that people are using for strength don't actually represent strength. Again, one of the big takeaways I wanted to talk about for this is that the perfumers are not necessarily at fault. It is because the fragrance market is so saturated. There's so many fragrances everywhere. And one of the most important things for consumers is longevity, especially considering that fragrances are so expensive. And I completely understand this. So what is the most straightforward way for brands to represent that their fragrances are long lasting? By telling you it has 30% perfume oil, 40% perfume oil. That sets us apart from the other brands. But this video is to explain that that does not actually signify what it seems like it signifies. And I wanted to provide a nuanced conversation about the science that goes into this, and just give you guys some food for thought. And I'm not saying all brands that have market their percentages are evil or are lying about it, because they're definitely not. That said, it's just a nuanced conversation. And one of the reasons that you can't make blanket statements about the fragrance industry is because every brand is completely unique and complex and approaches things in a different way. And so there are brands that will take advantage of you and, businessmen who want to get into fragrance by knowing it's a profitable industry. And so they will do all of these tactics. And then there's other brands that are artisanal and really just want to make something unique and are dedicated to the craft. But as a consumer, you might not know the difference. And so I just wanted to flag some concerns that I have so you guys are more informed consumers. And I'm still learning, I'm a student, just kind of getting as much information as I can. I don't know everything about the industry, but this is one thing that I've noticed a lot lately. And of course, there is so much nuance in conversation. And I'm not saying that more oil makes your perfume weaker. If you're adding more of something, generally you will have more result of that thing. And the point of this video was to tell you it's not exactly so straightforward, it's not exactly so linear. And with my channel as well, I don't want every single video to just be top 10 fragrances for life every 2 weeks. Perfume recommendations, because my name is called Perfumerism, and it's kind of harping on the fact that being into fragrances is kind of a consumerist hobby, and you're following these trends and constantly wanting to buy new things. And I don't want my page to just be constantly reviewing new things and recommending new things. I want my page to have insight about the industry and foster conversation and really just be like a fun place to learn and come and talk and discuss. So that's kind of the point of my videos lately. And I have a lot of other videos where I talk about Perfume 101, how to find a dupe for fragrances, ranking fragrances by bottles, just give you more than just recommendations over and over and over. So that is what I try to do with my page, and hopefully this video was a little interesting for you guys. If you have any questions or anything that you want me to do a deep dive on or anything like that, please let me know in the comments below. So if you like this video, please leave a like, leave a comment. If you have anything to say, subscribe, it would really boost the channel. And if you enjoy me by any means, follow me on Instagram. I'm a lot of fun there, and I give you some day-to-day about perfumery school and just the fun things that I'm doing in Paris. So you can follow me there. I would really appreciate it. And please subscribe if you're here. Boost the channel, boost the algorithm. Makes me happy. Love you guys. Bye.